Greetings, friends. My name is Charles Q. Banks, and I'd like to welcome you back to my classic podcast. Today, I shall be talking about one of my childhood favorite games, Crash Bandicoot. So, I am pretty tired right now, so if I don't make much sense, just forget about it. Don't worry about it. I'll be all right. But yeah, so let me get on to the topic. Crash Bandicoot was released for the PlayStation 1 in 1996, when I was but a young'un, 4 years old, and with very little experience in life. My brother, however, was an avid video gaming fan, and he bought a PlayStation 1 just right the year after. And he and I bought Bandicoot together and played it together, and I continued playing it even when he went off to college. And so Crash Bandicoot is, of course, a runner platformer in the style of what some would say is that iPhone game, what's it called? Tomb Runner? I think that's what it's called, not sure. But it's not necessarily exactly like that, but it borrows many things from Crash Bandicoot. Basically, that the level is on rails, that you have to go in one specific, area at any given time, one direction, not a reference to the band, and but you can, of course, stop and go as slowly or as quickly as you possibly can. And it felt very good to be able to run through a level without getting hit and without dying, because one hit is one death. TNT boxes explode and you're dead if you're too close. Of course, if you have a Hootabara or an Aku mask, then you have a shield for one hit. And if you get two, and if you get three Aku masks out of crates, then you are invincible and can run through enemies. Of course, you can spin, and that's your only attack, and you can jump on top of enemies, much like Mario, and that is your second real attack. And those were the only things that you could do way back when, and you just ran through jungle-filled areas, cracking open boxes, getting Wumpa fruits and eating them in order to, get 100 so that you could get a life out of it. And lives, of course, were just hanging around, and they were shaped, of course, just like your face, so you knew, if you eat your own face, you get a free life. It makes a lot of sense. I'm being sarcastic, if you couldn't tell. So I loved these games, and they were definitely very hard, but no harder than, I would say, Donkey Kong Country or Mario, the original Super Mario Brothers were. And in the series, Super Mario 1, 2, and 3, they were all extremely difficult to actually get through, and Crash Bandicoot was no exception. When I was still very young, at about 6 years old, I would play it with my brother, and he was more the completionist. He wanted to just get through the game as quickly as possible, just to complete it. Maybe not to get 100% in that way of saying completionist, but he wanted to get to the end, and that was always his end goal. If he was stuck on a level, he would just ram his head up against it until he won, and he didn't really care about getting the extras. Me, however, I was very just into the whole world. It was a very zany world, very crazy world. Everyone in Crash Bandicoot is insane in one way or another. Crash Bandicoot is, of course, a mutant, much like Wolverine, who was created by an insane scientist named Dr. Neocortex, who had kind of a triangular giant yellow head with, sprawling black hair shooting off from the sides. And, of course, a beard, and I think a Fu Manchu, and he was insane, with a metal N just stuck on his forehead. And his helpers included N. Brio, who has screws on either side of his head. He's screwed up mentally. And then there was N. Jin, and that he's from the second game, who has a literal rocket that's live, was never exploded, stuck into his head, into the side of his head. Everyone has something wrong with their heads, and Crash Bandicoot is no exception. He fell quite a long way from the laboratory he was escaping, and landed on the beach, and hasn't been the same ever since. I think he's always been insane though, and he's only got insaner. And that's something I like about this game. It's still very kind of morbid. There are lots of deaths, very cartoony though, deaths that you can see and witness if you should die on any number of the many obstacles you encounter. If you hit a TNT box, you just disappear, but then your eyeballs and tennis shoes fall down from the sky. Or if you jump off into a pitfall, your shoes fly up into the air. And it's all charming and everything. And if a boulder runs over you, you are literally flattened into a paper-thin substance that just kind of flutters into the air and, is no more. And it was all fun and happy, and it kind of took off some of the edge of dying over and over and over, which, of course, you're going to die over and over and over in a game that has similar difficulty, at least, to Super Mario Brothers or Donkey Kong Country, any of those old platformers. Even Super Mario 64 was very difficult to actually get through as a child. And as an adult, though, I grew up, many years later, probably when I was 12, I came back to Crash Bandicoot, because all I'd ever done was just gone through the first, 5 levels of Crash Bandicoot, because I just loved them so much. Just loved roaming around, smacking into boxes, bouncing on crabs, killing innocent wildlife. It was all very fun, and I didn't care about completing the game. I just cared about exploration and the action of crushing things. This is painting a great view of my childhood, and I loved it. And so later on, when I was about 12, I actually went through and completed every single level of the game, even got a couple of the secrets, but I finished the game. I beat Dr. Neo Cortex and won the first game. Then I wanted the second one for my birthday the year afterward, and I got that for my birthday, and I was very happy with that. And that even was a little bit harder, a little more difficult. The first but the first level of Crash Bandicoot 1 was extremely easy. All it was doing was familiarizing you with the controls and the fact that you hop on certain boxes and you don't hop on other boxes, and you can get multiple Wumpa Fruit from this box and only one from this box, and you can't kill this enemy by spinning, but you can kill this enemy by spinning, and so on and so forth. In the second one, the first level was filled with obstacles, and you could die many times without getting through it. And there was a secret area that was very easy, actually, to get to, so it wasn't much of a secret. And you had lots more ways to die, and many more moves in your move set. So you could slide, instead of just spinning and jumping, you could slide, you could high jump, you could long jump, and you could body slam. And these all mixed it up, and so you had lots more things to remember. Pitfalls were longer at certain points, so that you had to do the long jump and not just a normal jump. And that's the thing about Crash Bandicoot. It's very trial and error based, like many games of old. Ye olden games, the olden games were. You just take a leap of faith, and sometimes there was a platform on the other end, and sometimes there wasn't. In fact, I'd say most of the time there wasn't a platform at the end of a leap of faith. You just had to do something completely different. And this was not something that put me off, because I endured through most of these old games, and the only game that was actually really pretty easy, and I still enjoyed it, was the original Kirby for the SNES, the Super Nintendo, and I loved it. Even though it was super simple, it still was kind of challenging. You didn't die all the time. You had a pretty large life bar, and they gave you many lives and many ways to get lives in that game, and many ways to play the game. And it was fun, and it was kind of easy, but then there were bonus areas that were extremely hard, that relied on pinpoint accuracy and skill, and, hitting the jump button at the exact moment that the gun goes off, or whatever it was, high jumping bonus rounds in which you could get several lives if you held the X, the jump button for long enough or for short enough, however it was, and they were very difficult and added a layer of depth to the game that would otherwise not have been there. And that's probably one of my favorite games as well, the original Kirby in Dreamland, I think it's called. Yeah, I love it. Kirby kind of reigns supreme, but Crash Bandicoot reigns alongside him in, co-authoritarian regime over all the other video games that I've ever played. I prefer Crash Bandicoot in a way because, yes, the original Kirby was fun, but the subsequent games were never quite the same, or quite as fun, I think, as the original game that I played when I was 6 years old. So yes, I was introduced to video games very early on, thanks my brother. What does that have to do with why I am talking about it today? Why is this even being brought up? I haven't really done much video game commentary in the past. I've only just done, how many? Like, maybe 15 episodes at most. I don't even know. Maybe it was 8. I don't know how many episodes I did of a live stream of Banjo-Kazooie, and I didn't even complete it. I got to the place where the Game Grumps stopped, and I stopped there as well. It got really kind of boring for a while. I may come back to that and finish it, and I hope I do, and I really want to, if I have the energy and not just the willingness to have a tirade like this one. But I've never really gotten into this commentary, so why am I even bringing it up? Well, I do love Crash Bandicoot so much that if anyone says anything bad about it, I have to kind of come against them. I kind of have a temper in the things that I love the most. And so when it came to Crash Bandicoot, lo and behold, there is a new Crash Bandicoot game out since this last month, and it is a remaster of all 3 of the original Crash Bandicoot series from the 90s that ended in Crash Bandicoot Warped, which I also bought, before the title of Crash Bandicoot was given over to other brands other than Naughty Dog, who is responsible for, I think, The Last of Us and Nathan Drake series, the Uncharted series, and Jak and Daxter, which is still pretty old, but many people remember Jak and Daxter and not Crash Bandicoot. But the people who played Crash Bandicoot generally loved it, and if they didn't love it, it was just kind of another video game. So no one disliked Crash Bandicoot. Everyone I talked to, it was one of those games that you had to play if you were going to be on the cutting edge of video gaming in the 90s. And so now there is a remaster called the N.Sane Trilogy for the PlayStation 4. Yes, the PlayStation 4, the most recent console that was released, except now there's the Xbox One X, or whatever the heck it is. I don't even understand why they would name it that. It's more confusing than ever. They could have come up with something completely different, but no, it's the Xbox One X. So it's on the PlayStation 4, and it has updated graphics, which that is something that the new, the old fans of Crash Bandicoot really have always wanted, a remaster of Crash Bandicoot, the originals, and they've told developers this year after year after year, ever since 2000, when the last, Crash Bandicoot Warped came out. They've been wanting remasters of the original 3 games, to revisit these games, or have a new game that's just like them. And developers of Activision and Naughty Dog even have talked about this. Back in 2013, there were interviews with them, and they showed great interest in the intellectual property of Crash Bandicoot, and maybe coming back to it and making new ones, because the fan base is just so stinking strong. It's a niche kind of market, niche group of people, but they really are passionate about Crash Bandicoot, and I have been a part of that fan base for a long time. I bought basically every Crash Bandicoot game proper that ever came out, except for the racing games. I loved CTR, Crash Team Racing, when it came out on the PlayStation 1, and I bought Nitro Kart, and Nitro Kart wasn't as fun because it wasn't done the same way as Crash Team Racing was. It's extremely slow. I actually played that today, and I am incredibly confounded at how slow Nitro Kart, something that sounds like it would be really fast, how slow it is and how boring of a game it is. I mean, it's one of those games that you can just turn on and just play for the heck of it and get nothing really out of it. You can play with your friends, and that's where, you can get around a game with a couple friends, but the Mario Kart series is much more fun to play, more interesting, better graphics. I don't think Nitro Kart was ever that good, even in its heyday. But, anyway, the N.Sane Trilogy was given to us by seemingly the gods of Crash Bandicoot, and we have been blessed by its gifting. It's exactly what the fans have always wanted, and Activision and Vicarious Visions put it together as an act of love to the fans. They talked about it as a remaster and possibly a reboot, but that wasn't really the intention. The intention was always for it to just be the original games brought back to life by modern technology. And that's exactly what they did. I bought the game when I heard that it was out, which was actually a few weeks after its original release. But I've been playing it, and I got through the original game, the first game out of the trilogy, and I just stinking love it. I had a lot more patience to actually go for the secrets, and so I have about 80% of all of the game in terms of the first game finished, Crash Bandicoot 1, and I am going on to the next one, the next game. And it's exactly the same as I remember it in terms of my enjoyment of it. There are some things that are different, and I wish they could have kept the originals, but I understand that those things that are different, such as the voicing, some of the sound effects, and some of the movement of Crash is a little different, but all of these things can be totally forgiven because of I think, the quality with which they have brought back this series, because they couldn't have brought back the same exact sounds from 1996 in order to put the track behind a graphically 2017 version of the game. That would have been completely discordant if they had done so. So I completely understand why some of those sounds aren't exactly as nostalgic as I wanted them to be. And this is what the game is for, is to bring back nostalgia for those who have played it, and show people who never played it what this old game was all about and why it was so amazing. Because a lot of gamers are, kept from playing these wonderful games because they're so old, and you have to buy a PlayStation 1, which is really kind of a collector's item these days, and very, very expensive. I mean, you can find them on eBay probably for $40 or something, but for some people that's just a step too far. I mean, I would do it, but when I heard that they were re-releasing these games, I was super excited because my own copies of Crash Bandicoot were destroyed by how many times I played the heck out of it. And even my PlayStation 1 was destroyed from me just playing it for probably 10 years longer than it deserved, than it was given the ability to play for. No one is expected to keep a PlayStation in pristine condition, especially if they're playing it almost every day, which I did for many years. And so, yeah, I was very happy that they released this thing, and it is kind of a different experience because of the differences. It feels like between Crash Bandicoot 1, 2, and 3 in this N.Sane Trilogy, it feels like all one game, because the graphics don't change from one game to another, and the mechanics don't change from one game to another. It's all homogenized. Crash Bandicoot moves the same way throughout all three, whereas back in the day, if you were to play through Crash Bandicoot 1 and then pop in Crash Bandicoot 2, you would immediately notice the difference in playstyles. And graphics and sound effects, because it was gradually getting better and better, and Crash Bandicoot Warped, to some, is the pinnacle of Crash Bandicoot fun, whereas I think that the original was the ultimate experience, because it was basically the most challenging, the hardest, the most simple and pure form of platforming that you could possibly get from a Crash Bandicoot game. But that's just me. I have a lot of nostalgia for the original game, and even though I love the subsequent 2, I will always go back to playing Crash Bandicoot 1 just because of the feel of those levels. So, that's not the main reason why I wanted to talk about this. I love the N.Sane Trilogy, and I love the originals. But that's not enough for me to get hyped to talk about something on the internet. For me to actually talk about something on the internet with passion, I need someone to fight against. I need some opposition in order to have the passion to deal with something, to actually say something in public. So, what is it? So I was blown away with the game. It's obviously not a new game with new features and optimized for the next generation, but it's so good, it's so well remastered, the game that I already loved, that I can say almost nothing negative against it. Sure, the graphics could be maybe a little bit better based on what we've seen from games like, Horizon Zero Dawn, but that wasn't even the purpose of this remaster. The purpose of it was to show you with, basically pretty good graphics of the 2017 era, a game that could possibly come back as a whole series, and maybe jump off with new Crash Bandicoot games. Because Crash Bandicoot, gosh darn it, is the ultimate mascot for Sony and for PlayStation. And he's been in the dumps for, I would say, 17 years. They've tried to bring him back in new guises, such as the Crash of the Titans Bandicoot, but that wasn't Crash. That was some emo, goth, punk idiot who spoke like SpongeBob SquarePants on drugs, and I didn't like him. And I bought the games because it had Crash on it, but that's not Crash, and I don't think any of the fans actually liked those games as much as the originals. Nor did anyone else, for that matter, like them very much. So it's good to see Crash back in his rightful place at the head of PlayStation again, and they can very easily, I think, come up with new ways to reinvigorate the Crash genre and use him as the mascot of PlayStation again with some actually good games. They could even remaster Crash Nitro Kart or Crash Bandicoot what's the other term? The other game that I'm forgetting about. I think everyone forgets about this game. It was Crash Bandicoot Wrath of Cortex that came out for the GameCube and Xbox, and it was basically just kind of a clone of Crash Bandicoot Warped, but it stayed faithful to the heart and spirit of Crash Bandicoot. So they could remaster that. If they just kept remastering Crash Bandicoot games in the spirit of the originals, I think the fans and people of all ages would definitely get on board, because the N.Sane Trilogy, which is nothing but bringing back the 3 old games, nothing more than that, has sold amazingly well. In Britain, Crash Bandicoot sold second best of all games of 2017, which is incredibly remarkable, and it's sold almost as many worldwide as not Breath of the Wild, Wildlands, and which is, again, very, very impressive. So that shows that there's enough interest in the character and enough nostalgia from the fans to keep this thing going, and to even increase the amount of good that comes out of this. But what have I seen? But a whole lot of reviews from gaming, websites like Polygon and, GameSpot, and others on blogs mostly, but some YouTube videos as well. Reviewers and gamers complaining about Crash Bandicoot, the N.Sane Trilogy. Why is this? What is it they're complaining about? They're giving it a 6 out of 10. Every single other critic, including Metacritic, IGN, I believe, gave the game at least an 8 out of 10, sometimes an 8.5, and in certain rare cases, 9 out of 10, because I think they understood what the old people felt, which is the immense love for the original games, and they obviously had that love for the original games. The makers of this game obviously had that same love that the fans did, and they did exactly what they said they would do. But I read these new blogs, such as on Polygon, and what is it that they have to say negative about this game? Does it have to do with the look of Crash, or of the look of the world, the art design? No. Does it have to do with the sound design? No. Does it have to do with the level design? Well, that's debatable, but basically no. So what does it have to do with? The difficulty level. That is the one thing that I have heard spoken of the most negatively by critics and gamers alike on YouTube. And they're always millennials. They're always the younger generation, and I'm one of them, but I don't hold to that same idea that Crash Bandicoot is just too hard, and the N.Sane Trilogy should have changed up the game a bit, is what I've heard people say. That the game is just too hard. It's a rage game. It's mediocre. It's not very good in a world of high-tech gaming. It's too hard to actually include casual gaming and gamers. No one who actually never played Crash will actually like these games because they don't care. Nobody cares about old games anymore. These are the types of things that I am hearing from critics and reviewers alike on the internet these days, and that is what infuriates me. And I'll tell you why. Like I said before, Crash Bandicoot came out in a day and an age in which all games were equally challenging. Games like Kirby, however, did break the mold in that they were more meant for young and casual players. However, Kirby in Dreamland, and even Kirby the Crystal Shards from the Nintendo 64 days, those were still exceedingly difficult when compared to modern gaming standards. Basically anyone could get through the Crash of the Titans. Anyone, almost, can get through the Call of Duty games. Games have fallen off in difficulty in these past 17 years to such an extent that I think it has allowed a whole generation of gamers, and even gamers who used to play those old games, to be bred into believing that games should be easier for casual gamers to be able to get in on it. And if they're not that easy, then that is a problem. That is a design issue. That is a flaw in the game. People who say that Crash Bandicoot is too difficult are the same people who say that Dark Souls is too difficult, and that Dark Souls was not meant for the casual player, and that means that it is a badly made game. But hey, guess what? Not all games are created equal, and not all games should be created equal. All games should have a unique flavor and a unique difficulty level. If all games were the same difficulty level all the time, that would be boring. Even Crash Bandicoot, while it was extremely difficult, it was probably more difficult than, let's see, certain Sonic games, but it was not quite as difficult as certain Mario games. And it was a bit harder than Donkey Kong Country, but then, the original Donkey Kong was definitely more difficult. The pixelated one. And like Donkey Kong Jr., that was almost impossible, whereas Crash Bandicoot is like a walk in the park compared to that. So that's what you see, is like everything was more difficult back in the day, but there was definitely a unique difficulty level across the board. These days, games like Dark Souls that actually have challenge, that actually have pitfalls, that actually rely on the skill and observational abilities of the gamer, are considered too hard, are considered for niche audiences. And this is something that I actually bemoan. I wish this weren't the case. I wish that people would be bold enough to make incredibly difficult games these days, and I think they are. They have seen that games have been getting too easy, and that's why we have these rogue games, what's it called? Rogue-like games. Red Rogue, for example. And these games where you die once and you go back to the beginning and you never have the same experience as you would have that first time, because the game is that challenging. If you get through the game at all, you are amazing, and it is rare that you did that. With Crash Bandicoot, it's not going to be that rare that people actually finish it. It's going to be rare that anyone gets more than, 3 gems throughout the game. It's going to be rare that anyone gets all of the gems. Extremely rare. I mean, there are obviously many people who already have, but those people are not casual gamers. Those are the gamers who sunk hours and hours and hours, days upon days, until they finished it within the first week of its release. People have already 100%ed the first couple games, if not all of them. And so it's not impossible. It is actually easier than a lot of really old games, and yet, people are giving it a 6 out of 10, not because the graphics are bad, not because the gameplay is unfun, or because the character is unlikable, or any of these big problems that you would have with a remake. It's because it's too hard. And that, I think, is something is wrong here. It's having the wrong perspective when coming as a reviewer, trying to be as objective as you possibly can, having, of course, a subjective opinion, but also informing the player as to, or essentially the potential player, as to what the game was made for, so that they can make the decision themselves as what they should think. Not just saying, this is how I think, and you should think that too. Which is exactly what I've seen from these people who have given ratings lower than a 7, because I think this game is probably a 7. In my mind, it's a 10 out of 10 just because it's Crash Bandicoot, and I always love Crash Bandicoot from a subjective standpoint. But as a game, as a remaster, it is a 7, if not an 8 out of 10. There are so few remasters that have, or remakes, or even reboots of video game genres or old video game properties that actually do it as well as this game. And that's why this game is good. Not because of the original game content. This remaster should be critiqued on its faithfulness to the original games almost alone. I say almost alone because there are many things that go into a remake, such as the graphical fidelity, how much extra content there is, and so on and so forth. But mainly, if the remake is faithful to the old game, the old gamers, especially, are going to be extremely happy about it. And the normal people, the rest of the community, shouldn't have anything, feel anything wrong about this, because they could possibly get into it too. There is nothing keeping new gamers from enjoying Crash Bandicoot, even the quote-unquote restrictive difficulty level. That has nothing to do with whether or not the remake is a good one. If it has the same difficulty level as the original game, then it has fulfilled its purpose perfectly. And that is exactly what it has done. And this is an excellent remaster. It is not a reboot. It is not trying to come up with new gameplay. It is not trying to increase or decrease the difficulty level for the purpose of garnering casual players or pandering to a larger audience. It is meant as a labor of love to those who have been without the real Crash, the true Crash, for more than a decade. And that is amazing. I think that is something that I can really get behind, is developers and teams and a company that cares about its fan base so much and about original content so much that it will go great lengths and even forsake some of the modern gaming tropes in order to satisfy the customers. And this is for the nostalgic Crash fanboys, the Crash Bandicoot boys, the Crash Banda boys. It's for them. And the good thing about this game being out on the PS4, a relatively new console, is that other people who have never played these old wonderful games will now get to play it. And not in a new, redone way that makes him, some, I don't know, LGBTQ character who is also black and has an afro and does drugs and, is politically correct or whatever. Whatever it is that this modern day would have done to Crash, they didn't do it to Crash. And that's something in and of itself that is, I think, integrous about the game developers for this game. So, please, if you have something to say about a game, and if you are a reviewer who has to play this game, then please know what you're doing and what you're getting into before you say anything. If you come to this game and expect it to be any different from the originals, of course you will be disappointed. If you didn't like the original games, you will not like these games. Point made. I do think that this game could have had a bit more extra content for being, a remaster. Even being a remaster, just redoing the games, they could have added something extra just for the fun of it, but there really isn't anything more than the first 3 games to actually get into. It's nice to be able to play Coco Bandicoot, Crash's sister, in any level of the game, but it isn't that much of a change to actually, I think, satisfy a rating that would be 10 out of 10. That's why I say it's a 8 or 9 or a 7, because yeah, there could be some bonus content, some DLC, and they are going to come out with some DLC, so I'm excited to see what that will be. And if they come out with some extra content that is added on to the original games, then this game will be a 10 out of 10, because it is fulfilling all of its intents and its purposes. If you're just saying all games should be the same, then this game fails at that, and oh boy, does that make it horrible. So these are just some of my thoughts on these games, and I can't help but think that the modern snowflake mentality, forgive my use of this pretty overused term these days, but the snowflake mentality is really grating on me. I think that many people have been bred to accept just, being fed life on a platter, and everything being handed to you easy. And that's something that gaming has taught me not to do. Video gaming from a very young age, with the very old games, such as the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the Super Nintendo, that game really struck hard against the spirit of entitlement, and really disillusioned me towards TMNT in general, because I wanted to play and get through this game so badly. But it was so hard. I love TMNT and the intellectual property and the original cartoon, etc. But I couldn't get through that game. It was too hard, and those stinking water levels. It was awful. But it taught me endurance. It taught me perseverance, and that's exactly what Crash Bandicoot can teach you. That's exactly what Dark Souls can teach you, is to persevere through the darkness, through the times when you just fall flat on your face. It teaches you to get back up, even though your eyeballs have been blown out of your head, and there's nothing left of you but a smoldering cinder. You still have life in you. If there is any breath in your lungs, you have the ability to pick yourself up off the ground and to complete the next level of your life. And so with that, I'd like to say God bless. Your opinions are valid, but please be aware that there is an objective rating system for remakes and remasters that has nothing to do with its actual difficulty level, as long as it is fulfilling the developer's original intents for the game. Thanks for listening. Sayonara.